I was over at my friend John's house the other day, and we were discussing the easiest way to disassemble my neighbor's backyard shed, when, out of the blue, he asks me, "Hey, do you think I can build a cabinet?" And I replied, "Oh, cabinets? Pfft, cabinets are easy." He said, "Oh, good. I didn't know if I was going to be able to because of the tools I have." He proceeded to show me his vast tool collection consisting of a hammer and one spring clamp. So I said, "I might have some tools that can help you on this. Did you want my help?" He said, "That'd be great." And he ran inside to show me what he was thinking. He then proceeded to gesture out one of the biggest sets of built-ins that I've ever imagined. He was showing me how he wants a whole bunch of cabinets that line the bottom, a wide and tall adjustable bookcase on either side, and then a huge open cabinet that spans across them both at the very top. This is when I realized that I had just walked into a trap. Oh boy. Well, I'll give it my best shot. Here we go. John sent me over a sketch he had made that gave me an idea of what he was looking for. I drew it up in Fusion 360, but I went ahead and I added a few things that he left out, like countertops and a toe kick. I put in drawers and drawer faces, and then doors too. And then I figured, well, let's add some adjustable shelving. And heck, let's dress this thing up a bit more and stick on some crown molding on top. Wow, this is going to be quite a project. It's so big that I won't be able to tackle it all in a single video, so I'll have to split this into two. In this video, I'll just be focusing on how I'm building all the cabinet carcasses, all the face frames, and the toe kicks that they sit on. Let's get started. The folks over at Rockler will be helping me out on this project too, which is great, because to be honest, I really felt I was in over my head. I've never done anything like this, and I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. So to learn a bit about how to build cabinetry like this, I watched some of Jason's videos over on his channel, Bourbon Moth Woodworking, and I highly recommend him. He's super talented and an excellent teacher. I'll have a link in the description to the video that really helped me. Well, the first thing that has to be done is that all these sheets of plywood need to get cut down into more manageable sizes. And to do that, I put down some pieces of rigid foam and then plop down one of the sheets on top of it. This way I don't have to worry about my saw blade cutting into my work surface. I just measure it in from the edge in a couple locations where my breakdown cut should be, line my track right up to the marks, make sure it's perfectly square, and then cut it in a way where I get to show off my underwear to everyone that's watching. I had to cut down like 9 sheets of material in total, which ended up making my neighbor's shed look pretty sparse, but it certainly filled up my shop. And it should be just about all that I'll need to make this massive set of built-ins. Each time I cut down a sheet, I'd label it so that I wouldn't lose track by scribbling on some tape with the world's dullest Sharpie. Then I'd stack it up against the rest and go on and cut down the next one. Once I had all the sheets cut down into their panels, I cut each of them down to the final pieces. Enjoy this 4-hour marathon table saw session that has been condensed down to just 10 seconds. And then I had all the pieces cut out. Now to construct the cabinet carcass, I first need to cut in a rabbet along the bottom edge of the sides. This will hide all the plywood edges of the bottom, but it'll also help the pieces fit together better during assembly. Plus, I'll also cut in a dado towards the back of the sides, the bottom, and the top for the back panel to fit into. The first thing I had to do was to put on my sacrificial fence and to put my dado stack into my saw. Then I could rip down each of the rabbets into all the side panels. After that, I could use my regular high tooth count blade and cut in all the dados for the back panel to fit into. Now, since the thickness of the back panel is wider than the kerf of my saw blade, I had to widen each of the dados by making another cut after doing some small fence adjustments so that I could sneak up on the perfect fit. I just used a piece of scrap wood and then did lots of tests until I had it fitting just right. Then, with the fence in the right spot, I could just run all the pieces through again and then have a perfectly sized dado in each one. At this point, I could give all the pieces a dry fit, and this should give you a pretty good idea of how it all fits together. With everything looking good, it was time to drill in some pocket holes into the bottoms and into the braces. And since I'm a nice guy, I let my buddy John do all that work while I stood nearby silently judging him. Now before we assemble the carcass, I wanted to drill all the holes into the sides so that we could make the internal shelves adjustable. And for that, I used the Pro Shelf Drilling Jig from Rockler. This thing basically hugs each one of your side panels, and it can be tightened down for a snug fit. Then you just take a 1/4-inch self-centering bit and drill out each of the locations. It also comes with these little pins so that you can firmly lock it into place and ensure all your holes are perfectly spaced and in line. Then after you're done drilling, you just pop it off. Give things a quick sanding, and then you're done. Now for the tall uprights, the jig wasn't big enough to span the whole distance. So to handle those, I drilled out what I could. And then I relocated it so that the first holes in the jig were overlapping the last ones that I just drilled. Then I popped the pins in to lock it into place and then finished drilling out all the rest of the locations. Once done, I had the whole thing laid out with perfectly spaced holes for the adjustable shelves. Now we can actually assemble the carcass. I start by running a bead of glue down the rabbets of the sides. Then I fit the bottom piece into place. And to help me hold things square, I use the corner clamping assembly squares. I just line things up, drop on a corner clamp, and tighten it down. These things hold the two pieces at a perfect 90 degrees, and they make it easy for me to drive in the pocket screws from underneath without letting the pieces slip or move at all. They're pretty slick. I was talking to a friend of mine recently that makes a lot of cabinets, and he was telling me that these corner clamps were an absolute game changer for him. He swears by them. And from what I can tell so far, I would agree. They're basically an extra set of hands to hold things while you drive in screws. Once I had the sides on, I could slide in the back panel into the dados that we cut earlier. Then the top brace, which also has a dado, can be fit into place. I add some glue on the ends, I clamp it firmly between the sides, and then I drive in the pocket screws. And since I didn't want that brace to be lonely, I added a second one towards the front edge. This one obviously doesn't need a dado because there's no panel that's fitting into it, so they're a little bit different. But that's okay, they'll still get along. Now the carcass got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there, and I'll tell you how I added 2 more braces onto the back side of the cabinet. Since I spaced the back panel in by 3/4 of an inch, these braces will sit in there perfectly flush. Plus, they'll add a lot more rigidity to the carcass as well as give me a solid mounting point to eventually screw these cabinets to the wall. With all the braces glued and screwed into place, I could add some trim screws that go up from the bottom into the bottom back brace, as well as some that come down from the top into the back top brace. These things just add a bit more structural support by tying things together even more. And plus, it eliminates the cabinet from being able to rack side to side at all. At this point, the typical cabinet carcass is done, and I can haul it out of my tiny shop and start working on the big uprights. Now these things go together a little bit differently. For one, there's no bottom panel on these carcasses. Instead, there's a solid top piece, and once I get one side and one top together, I can finagle the huge back panel into place and then use a rubber mallet to play you the song of my people. Then the other side can slide down the edge of the back panel and get glued and screwed into the top. And once that's been secure, the entire thing can be tipped down and a brace can be installed at the top, as well as another one on the bottom back side, which will be glued and fastened into the sides. This will lock the back panel into place. And that wraps up the huge uprights that go on either side of the built-ins. Since they don't have a bottom panel, they'll just end up sitting right on the countertops that get fastened on top of the lower cabinets. But for now, I'll just set them up here in place to get a better idea of how things will look in the end. Okay, let's talk about toe kicks. These are the little 3-inch risers that the cabinets will sit on so that they're not just sitting right on the floor. Also, the cabinets have a bigger depth than the toe kicks, so when they're resting on top of them, they almost look like they're floating, as if Chuck Norris used his toes to kick them up in the air. And that's why they're called toe kicks. For the most part, they're just constructed using butt joints and then glued and pocket holed together. There's really nothing special or difficult about making them. The most important thing is to just ensure that you build them on a perfectly flat surface, so that they'll end up perfectly flat once you're done. The last thing that you want is for your cabinets to be wobbly when you sit them on top. Now these are the toe kicks for the center cabinets. The ones on the ends will be a little bit different. And that's because the ones on the end will have visible sides. And since nobody enjoys looking at the plywood edges or the pocket holes, we have to build these a little bit differently. These ends need to have miters to hide the plywood edges. And to reinforce those joints, I'll add another brace just on the inside of it and then pocket hole it in from the other direction. So the first thing I do is I tilt my table saw blade down to 45 degrees, and then I make my cuts for the miters. You can see how it'll all go together now. Next, I add some glue and I clamp the inside brace onto the mitered side piece. And then once that's dry, I can glue the front and the back pieces on, get the mitered seam looking perfect, and then screw it all together from the inside. And that's really it for toe kicks. Next is face frames. I start off by measuring the width and the height of one of my cabinets. And since I have the memory span of the common housefly, I immediately forget my findings and have to measure it all again. But face frames go together very easily. Basically, I just cut the pieces to length, rip them down to 1.5 inches wide, and drill in some pocket holes on the ends of the rails. And the rails are the ones that go horizontally. Then I just add some glue, clamp them down to the bench, and pop in the screws. To make the opening for the drawer, I just created some spacers to offset the rail just the right distance from the top, and then just zipped in some more screws. Now, some folks use a brad nailer to attach their face frames, and you can certainly do that. But I chose to glue mine on because I didn't want to have to fill and sand each of the nail holes, but mainly because I wanted to hear all those funny popping sounds as the clamps went on. Then once it dried, I sanded the seams on the face frame flat, and I cleaned up any glue drips that presented themselves. And the reason for doing this is so that my flush trim router would go around the entire cabinet very smoothly and not get hung up on anything. This left a perfectly flush edge, but in some areas there were still tiny gaps, and so I mashed in some peanut butter to fill the cracks. And once it had dried, I sanded things flush, and then the face frames were done, and I could carry it out of my shop while looking like a wounded penguin. Well, that covers how I make cabinet carcasses, toe kicks, and face frames. Be sure to watch the next video in the series where I cover everything else. Decorative arches, countertops and drawers, how to make all the doors, and then getting the whole thing installed into my friend's house. Thanks to Rockler for helping me out on this project. Their jigs made it super easy, and they saved me a ton of time. I'll have links to each of the products that I used in the video in the video description below. Hey, I sure hope you enjoyed the video, and if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, give the video a like, and drop me a comment down below. And if you really like the video, consider subscribing to the channel. You get to show your support to Fisher Shop while sending me a few extra dollars a month, which will promptly get spent on potato chips and peanut M&Ms. Well, That's it for now. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Oh, it's still attached. No. Crap, skis. Oh, crap. Get out of there. Oh, you turkey. Crap. Come on, man. Crap. Holy crap. What the heck? Oh, I did that whole thing without pressing record. Awesome.